A dark, eerie background sets the stage. The faint glow of a flickering candle is all that pierces the oppressive darkness. Tonight we delve into the chilling depths of true horror. These are not just stories. They are nightmares lived by real people, alone at home. Imagine the vulnerability, the isolation, the creeping dread that consumes you when you realize you might not be as alone as you think. Tonight, we explore 3 terrifying tales that will leave you questioning every creak and groan in your own home. Prepare to be disturbed as we journey into the heart of darkness, where fear takes root and nightmares come to life. Our first story takes us to a quiet suburban street, a place where manicured lawns and neatly painted houses whisper of normalcy and peace. It's here, in a home much like yours or mine, that a young woman named Sarah found herself facing a terror she could never have imagined. Sarah was home alone on a Friday night, her boyfriend away on a business trip, her cat curled up asleep at the foot of the bed. Rain lashed against the windows, a steady, comforting rhythm that lulled her into a false sense of security. She was reading a book when a sound, barely audible above the storm outside, caught her attention. It was a soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound, like claws gently dragging across the roof. She paused, listening intently, her heart starting to beat a little faster. The sound came again, a little louder this time, and Sarah found herself drawn to the window. She told herself it was probably just a stray animal, a raccoon or a squirrel seeking shelter from the storm. But a shiver of unease ran down her spine. Trying to shake off the feeling, Sarah went back to her book, forcing herself to concentrate. But the scratching sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from right above her, from the roof directly over her bedroom. Sarah's anxiety grew, her mind conjuring up images of shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. Unable to ignore it any longer, she got up and walked over to the window. Pulling back the curtain a fraction, she peered out into the stormy night. The wind howled around her, but she could see nothing through the driving rain and the impenetrable darkness. Convincing herself that she was overreacting, Sarah decided to check the attic. Armed with a flashlight, she slowly climbed the stairs to the attic door. The air grew noticeably colder as she approached, a damp, musty smell assaulting her senses. With a deep breath, she pushed open the attic door, her flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness. Dust motes danced in the beam of light, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten things. Sarah scanned the cluttered space, her heart hammering against her ribs, but at first glance, she saw nothing out of the ordinary. Our next story takes us to a bustling city, a place where the constant hum of activity and the anonymity of urban life can sometimes mask the darkness lurking beneath the surface. It's here, in a high-rise apartment building overlooking the city lights, that a young man named David experienced a night of terror that began with a series of unsettling events. David was a night owl, often working late into the night on his freelance writing projects. He enjoyed the peace and quiet of the city after dark, the way the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the glow of his computer screen. On this particular night, however, the usual comfort of his routine was shattered by a series of strange and increasingly disturbing occurrences. It started subtly, with a flickering light in the hallway outside his apartment door. He dismissed it as a minor electrical fault, something he would report to the building superintendent in the morning. Then, as he was working at his computer, he heard a noise from the living room. It was a soft thump, like something small had fallen to the floor. He paused, listening intently, but the sound wasn't repeated. Figuring it was probably just his cat knocking something over, he went back to his work, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease that was settling over him. A few minutes later he heard it again. This time it was louder, a distinct thud that echoed through the apartment. David got up from his desk and walked cautiously into the living room, his heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the room, his eyes searching the shadows in the corners, but he could see nothing out of place. He checked on his cat, who was curled up asleep on the sofa, seemingly undisturbed by whatever had made the noise. David told himself it was probably just the building settling, a common occurrence in older buildings like his. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, a nagging suspicion that something wasn't quite right. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences continued. David heard whispering voices outside his apartment door, faint murmurs that seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. He saw fleeting shadows moving in the periphery of his vision, dark shapes that darted out of sight whenever he turned to confront them. He tried to rationalize these events, to explain them away as figments of his imagination, tricks of the light, or the sounds of the city night echoing through his apartment. But the more he tried to convince himself that everything was fine, the more certain he became that something was terribly wrong. Then it happened. As David was working at his computer, his back to the window, he felt a cold chill run down his spine. Our final story takes us to a remote countryside cottage, a place where the silence of nature can be both beautiful and unsettling. It's here, in this isolated dwelling surrounded by dense woods, that an elderly woman named Eleanor found herself tormented by an unseen entity that seemed determined to drive her to the brink of madness. Eleanor had always been a solitary soul, content with her own company and the simple pleasures of rural life. She had lived in the cottage for as long as she could remember, her days filled with gardening, reading, and listening to classical music on her old gramophone. She had grown accustomed to the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the chirping crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. These were comforting sounds, familiar and reassuring, a reminder that she was part of something larger than herself. But recently, a new sound had begun to disturb the tranquility of her evenings, a sound that sent shivers down her spine and filled her with a sense of dread she had never known before. It started subtly, with faint whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls of her cottage, barely audible murmurs that she initially dismissed as tricks of the wind or the creaking of an old house settling. However, as the days turned into nights, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, more menacing. They seemed to follow her from room to room, taunting her, mocking her, whispering her name in the darkness. Eleanor tried to ignore them, to convince herself that she was just imagining things, that her mind was playing tricks on her in her old age. But the whispers persisted, growing bolder, more aggressive, until she could no longer deny their presence. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, slithering through the walls, seeping out from under the floorboards, swirling around her like a vortex of unseen malice. One night, as Eleanor sat in her living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, she heard a distinct voice whisper her name directly into her ear. It was a cold, raspy voice, devoid of any warmth or humanity, and it sent a jolt of fear through her entire body. She jumped up from her chair, her heart pounding in her chest, and spun around to confront the source of the voice. But the room was empty. The fire still crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but there was no one else there. Eleanor tried to calm herself, to tell herself that it was just her imagination, but the voice had been so real, so close, that she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone in the cottage. From that night forward, the whispers became a constant torment, a relentless assault on her sanity. They mocked her, taunted her, threatened her, and seemed to delight in her growing fear. They told her secrets about herself, things that no one else could possibly know, secrets that she had buried deep within her own mind, secrets that she had hoped to take to the grave. The darkness can play tricks on the mind, amplifying our fears and blurring the line between reality and nightmare. But as we've explored tonight sometimes, the horrors that haunt us are all too real. If you find yourself home alone, listening to the creaks and groans of your house, remember the stories of Sarah, David, and Eleanor. If you enjoyed these chilling tales of true horror, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more spine-tingling content. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Remember, you're never truly alone in the dark. Good night and stay safe.